Welcome to Undercurrents, our daily news show from Unheard's Washington Bureau. Today's guest is Senator Rand Paul. So subscribe here wherever you get your podcasts and over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. Celebrations continue in and around Damascus as opposition forces led by HTS are now starting to build a new government after toppling the long and brutal dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad. Assad fled Syria on Saturday, nearly 14 years after the Syrian revolution kicked off a civil war amidst the Arab Spring of 2011. We learned Monday, according to the Kremlin, that Assad ran to Moscow, where he was granted asylum. After moving into Syria to secure a buffer zone, Israel is being accused by countries including Saudi Arabia and Qatar of violating international law. Israel says its troops and airstrikes are aimed at Assad's rockets and chemical weapon supplies, which could be used by extremists. Turkish forces fired on Kurdish forces backed by the U.S. over the weekend, pitting NATO allies against each other in the immediate aftermath of Assad's downfall. 5 different countries are bombing Syria right now. Israel, Turkey, Russia, Iran, and the U.S. That's according to the New York Times. The geopolitics and domestic Syrian politics are just incredibly complicated, to say the least. On Saturday, President-elect Trump weighed in on X, posting there was never much of a benefit in Syria for Russia other than to make Obama look really stupid. In any event, Syria is a mess, but it is not our friend, and the United States should have nothing to do with it. This is in all caps now. He says, "This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved." So the U.S. armed jihadist rebels in Syria to defeat Assad. When Trump pulled troops out of the country in 2019, his defense secretary, James Mattis, actually resigned in protest. Even now, at least 900 troops remain in Syria. Trump's Director of National Intelligence nominee, Tulsi Gabbard, is now, according to the Associated Press, quote, facing fresh scrutiny Monday on Capitol Hill about her proximity to Russian ally Syria amid the sudden collapse of that country's hardline Assad rule. Gabbard, an Army National Reserve lieutenant colonel, has been dogged, as we talked about here last week with Eli Lake, by often laughable accusations of treason because she met with Assad on a trip to Syria as a congresswoman in 2017. Hawkish senators in the GOP could potentially tank her nomination if they're unsatisfied with Gabbard's answers about Syria. But if anything, the new challenges of Syria without Assad could also emphasize her point about U.S. involvement ultimately creating more problems. One of the senators who supports Gabbard is Kentucky Republican Rand Paul. Paul has long challenged the establishment consensus on this issue and, of course, many others. After Elon Musk pointed out on X that, quote, our tax dollars are somehow funding both sides again, referring to a 2016 Los Angeles Times story about CIA and Pentagon support for different groups in Syria, Senator Paul replied on Monday, quote, bring our troops home. The war pits Islamists against socialist Kurds against Iranian proxies, not our fight. 900 U.S. troops scattered about Syria are a target, not a deterrent. Paul is currently the ranking member of the Senate's Homeland Security Committee. I had the opportunity to sit down with him over Zoom on Tuesday to hash all of this out. Senator Rand Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
Now, when you say that 900 U.S. troops in Syria are a target, not a deterrent, I imagine some of your colleagues, actually on both sides of the aisle, might disagree and perhaps even argue that Assad was only toppled because of the United States and Israel. What are the risks here of a total withdrawal?
Well, I don't think 900 troops are doing anything of value there. I think they literally are a target. If you look at war in the Middle East and you look at the value of killing an American, they place a great deal of value on killing an American because that is symbolic for them. And so I think there's a disproportionate value to them to go try to seek out those 900 troops, which I don't think are doing much. They aren't deterring anyone. And if you look at why the rebels were able to advance on Damascus and why they took Damascus, it was largely with Turkey's help. We literally have different factions in this civil war that have been supported by different factions of our government. The Pentagon supporting one group of jihadists, the CIA supporting another, Russia in there, Iran in there, Assad. And there really are questions that are yet to be determined whether or not this group, which used to be part of al-Nusra, which used to be part of al-Qaeda, how are they going to treat Christians? And people say, well, are they going to be better or worse than Assad? Assad certainly wasn't my cup of tea or anybody who believes in democracy, and yet were Christians protected more by Assad than they will be by a branch of al-Qaeda. So there's a lot of unknowns here, but I don't think there are many military strategists that'll say 900 people or 900 soldiers, I think in 9 different locations. So we're talking about 100 people per location, 100 soldiers. That to me is a tripwire. That's a target. That's not a deterrent. And I think they should leave immediately and are having no influence now other than that they are possible targets.
This episode is sponsored by Lumen. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it actually lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, your workouts, your sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do, it's so easy, is breathe right into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism. Lumen will tell you if you are burning mostly fats or carbs. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. It's so amazing. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. Again, that is incredible. And Lumen will give you tips to keep you on top of your health game. It can also track your cycle as well as the onset of menopause and adjust your recommendations to keep your metabolism healthy through hormonal shifts so you can keep up your energy and stave off those cravings. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/undercurrents to get 15% off Lumen. Great deal. That is lumen.me/undercurrents for 15% off your purchase. Do you think it's possible that some of your colleagues will use the current chaos in Syria as a pretext to actually argue there should be more than 900 troops in Syria, to your point, actually?
Maybe. Remember back when Trump was in the last time, he was trying to move and remove some from Syria, and he got pushback from the Hawks, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, all saying, how dare he want to move these? And the great irony was they actually introduced legislation at that time to take the power away from him. So these are people who have traditionally been, the president has unlimited Article 2 authority to go to war, which is not true, but he does have fairly unlimited power to move troops around. And to my mind, and to many other constitutional observers' mind, the president does have the power to move troops in and out and around countries. And so I think that really what we're going to find here is, there's always people that want to put more troops into a situation. I don't think their value. And I think it's frankly very confusing, and I'm not positive who are the good guys. I wouldn't want my kid to die for Assad or his regime. I wouldn't want my kid to die for Hezbollah. I wouldn't want my kid to die for al-Nusra or ISIS. I'm not sure who I'd feel like it was a valuable loss of life. And if I don't want my sons to die, I certainly don't want anybody else's sons to die over a murky situation where, calling any of them freedom fighters would be a misnomer.
Yeah, I mean, al-Golani himself seems to be such a instructive example of what U.S. involvement in this region. I mean, this is somebody who went and fought in Iraq because he was radicalized actually by U.S. policy towards Israel, and we don't have to open up that can of worms. But I'm curious, you're the ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee, nobody seems to know what to expect from al-Golani at all, from the media to lawmakers. They don't seem to know whether he'll moderate or radicalize. What do you expect, Senator Paul, to see from HTS as they start trying to form a government? I
suspect that his major financer and the main reason he won was with help from Turkey. And Turkey is an avowed enemy of the Kurds, the Syrian Kurds. And I think the Syrian Kurds are avowed enemies of the Turks. So I think one thing is for certain, that as he consolidates power, the Syrian Kurds will be held in check, if not punished or imprisoned. What's the irony to that? Well, the Syrian Kurds were the ones we've worked closely with. I think we also did some work with al-Nusra and probably were supportive there as well at times during the civil war. But the main ones we were fighting alongside and arming and supplying were the Syrian Kurds. So the interesting thing about this group taking power is this is a defeat for Assad. It's a defeat for Russia. It's a defeat for Iran. But it's also a significant defeat for the Syrian Kurds. The Turks have solidified, I think, their occupation of parts of Syria and actually advanced on this. So there is a real question whether Syria will even exist as a country as it once was.
And you mentioned the plight of Christians in Syria right now. What do you expect to see from al-Golani, specifically as it relates to the Christians living in Syria, one of the most ancient Christian communities?
Well, I guess you'd hope that he's going to have modified his stance and they're going to be more tolerant. But This is not his history. It's not the history of the jihadist movement. And it's the unexpected outcome of toppling of dictators. I mean, Saddam Hussein was also a dictator in some ways, somewhat like Assad, not aligned as much with Iran, but also someone who tolerated Christians and even Jews to a certain extent in Iraq over time. And most of those Christians fled. There were probably several 100,000 under Hussein, and there's barely any left now. There's almost no Christians or Jews left in the country. And it is kind of sad. If you look at the history of Christianity, there's a very interesting history to see the Christians that were there from the time of Christ and have been there because they've been their own sort of offshoot of Christianity and unique in many ways. And just the history of them being there for so long, it's sad to see them expelled or killed.
And the scuttlebutt on Capitol Hill, of course, and in Beltway media is that this is just posing a real threat to Tulsi Gabbard getting confirmed as Trump's director of national intelligence. She's literally meeting with senators like yourself on Capitol Hill this week. What do you think that this helps or hurts Tulsi Gabbard's actual ability to be confirmed in any way, Senator Paul?
Not necessarily. I think that the history of Syria and the Middle East is such a complicated one that it isn't really clear. Like I say, were there positive aspects to the Assad regime? Very few, but one of them was the protection of Christians. Is there pluses and minuses to Golani or this new offshoot of al-Nusra? Yeah, there certainly are. One, they got rid of the dictator, but two, will they replace that with a religious intolerance towards others? I don't know that it definitely changes her chances. I think her 20-year military career, she's a lieutenant colonel, the way she's been treated unfairly by the intelligence state, putting her on a terror watch list and obstructing her ability to travel. I think that she's gaining momentum. There was a rally recently with military veterans. There's a lot of senators that have come out for her. So I think they're going to have a tougher time defeating her. They will try. And these are the people who are part of what they call the bipartisan consensus in Washington, foreign policy consensus, which is one of give aid to everyone, give arms to everyone, and be involved in everyone's wars. It's a policy of, eternal intervention. And those people are always going to be opposed to anybody who questions that. But I, for one, am enthusiastic about her nomination and will do anything I can or everything I can to try to help her.
Do you worry that Senator Rubio, your colleague in the upper chamber, is one of those supporters of eternal intervention? Would you worry about a potential Trump policy towards Syria with Marco Rubio at the State Department?
The history of Senator Rubio's foreign policy in the Senate isn't really what I perceive Donald Trump's to be. I think Donald Trump's had an aversion to war. I think he's got an aversion to having the troops in Syria. I think he's less likely to get us involved in a foreign war than any president in my lifetime. Those are all good things from my perspective. I don't think that's necessarily the history of Marco Rubio's foreign policy. There is a question whether he's evolved or changed or become more supportive of Donald Trump's foreign policy. That's yet to be determined. There were people in the past that were appointed, such as John Bolton, that were diametrically opposed to Donald Trump and didn't last. So part of lasting in a Trump administration is actually representing Donald Trump. So we'll see what happens over time. And my hope is that he will support Donald Trump on things such as removing the troops from Syria, not getting further involved in war over there, trying to end the Ukraine war. So I'm hopeful, but cautious.
And Senator, my last question is just over the years, how much the push to suppress people like yourself and Tulsi Gabbard has affected American policy towards Syria. I mean, being called a Putin or an Assad stooge just for criticizing the foreign policy consensus. How powerful was that at actually changing the way Americans saw the conflict and suppressing some of this conversation in the media and elsewhere?
I think we're actually winning this, the intellectual battle on overseas military interventions. Anytime I will post something on Twitter or X talking about, this isn't our fight in Syria, and Trump put something similar out, and we point towards the confusion of Iranian proxies, Assad, the Russians, the Al-Qaeda, all this confusion over there. I see significant support. I see a lot of outpouring on X of people who are supportive of this. When I give speeches to Republican groups around the country, I see near universal support. When I tell people we ought to be taking care of flood victims in North Carolina instead of small businesses in Ukraine, near universal support. So I think we actually are winning this battle and the people are with us. I think that the people like Mitch McConnell, who could be described as a Republican from Ukraine, as far as I'm concerned, I think those people are on the losing end of history and on the losing end of the Republican voters. I don't think the Republican voters support that. The idea that, who does Mitch McConnell support? He seems to be very supportive of Ukraine. He goes out to give a speech to a bunch of military industrial complex defense contractors, and they gave him a standing ovation for his support for sending more money to Ukraine. But meanwhile, we're $2 trillion short this year, $36 trillion in the whole overall. And I think he's on the losing end of history, and in many ways will be repudiated by the Republican voters over time.
Senator Paul, thank you so much. Looking forward to Festivus as always. As everyone here in DC is talking about how this could tank Tulsi Gabbard's nomination, I just want to highlight something Senator Paul said in our interview. He said that Tulsi, he thinks, is actually, quote, gaining momentum. And honestly, I'm sort of picking up on something similar. When Senator Tom Cotton said on Monday that he expects all of Donald Trump's nominees will be confirmed amidst the battle over Pete Hegseth, as just one example, but probably primarily at this point the most controversial nominee in the middle of the process as he's talking to people on Capitol Hill, that also, I think, was a signal about Tulsi Gabbard. I think that was also a signal about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but Tulsi in particular, that Senator Cotton, one of the more hawkish Republicans, would say that after the collapse of Assad's regime is really interesting. And I think to what Senator Paul said, it's not just because people are running out of steam. Republicans don't want to kind of step on the vibes, as one staffer told me recently. Nobody really wants to, quote, step on the vibes after Trump's win, and the left is running out of steam and just doesn't have it in them to be angry about everything. I don't think it's just that. I think senators are picking up on something that Rand Paul just told us here, which is the American people are tired of this. Even Republican voters who may have supported, for example, what the U.S. was doing in Afghanistan to fight Russia during the Cold War, they don't have the appetite for it anymore now. They see what's happened to hurricane victims, for example, and Donald Trump's arguments, Rand Paul's arguments, make a lot of sense to them. And so it's just that, it's not even just that, there are all of these logistical reasons that Tulsi Gabbard and others are ascendant. I think it's actually speaks to the sentiments of the Republican voters, the Republican electorate, and to the American people more broadly. And in no other place, arguably than Syria, will you see the follies of U.S. interventionism over the course of the last half century, at least, playing out. Senator Paul's point is absolutely right. There was at one time Pentagon forces backed by the Pentagon, fighting forces backed by the CIA, as the Los Angeles Times reported in 2016. The whole thing would be a parody if it weren't a tragedy. So, moving forward, there's still a lot of questions to be answered. How does Marco Rubio approach the question of Syria when his director of national intelligence is Tulsi Gabbard? How does Donald Trump handle the question of Erdogan when Turkish forces are now firing on U.S.-backed forces? That we'll see how that progresses. Donald Trump has been meeting with Zelensky and other world leaders, obviously just in Joe Biden's lame duck period. So we're getting some indications about how he plans to lead on foreign policy come January, but how he handles Erdogan, a NATO ally, is obviously of huge consequence. So we really appreciate Senator Paul coming here to Undercurrents and talking to us about some of these questions that a lot of journalists, frankly, have been too afraid to ask, have been too afraid to, quote unquote, platform Tulsi Gabbard or to let Rand Paul make his case without calling him a Putin stooge. I mean, the whole thing, again, it would be parody if it weren't tragedy. So to hear out Senator Rand Paul on this, I think was very helpful. We really appreciate the senator stopping by, and we will be back here with more Undercurrents tomorrow. Make sure to subscribe on the channel. Make sure to subscribe wherever you download your podcasts, and of course over at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of the show. Thanks for watching.